Wszystko zaczęło się od króla Jagiełły. Mała Łodzia stała się miastem, które w XIX wieku rozwijało się najszybciej na świecie. W ciągu zaledwie 60 lat od powstania pierwszej manufaktury powstaje przemysłowa, wielonarodowościowa metropolia. Jednak wiatry historii nie zawsze jej sprzyjały. To, co zniszczył los, odbudowują łodzianie. Nasza Łódź. Miasto wielkich szans. Od 600 lat w sercu Polski i Europy.
Jesteśmy Polakami. Jesteśmy niezwykłym społeczeństwem. Zawsze w obliczu wielkiego wyzwania potrafimy się mobilizować. Potrafimy stawić czoła wielkim wyzwaniom. Bo nie potrafimy stać obojętnie. Bo obchodzi nas bezpieczeństwo i przyszłość naszych dzieci. Bo wierzymy, że nadzieja zwycięża apatię, lęk i strach. Bo mimo wszelkich przeciwności nigdy się nie poddajemy. Potrafimy ciężko pracować, wspierać się i działać razem. Bo zależy nam na naszej ojczyźnie, naszym osiedlu, naszej ulicy. Bo chcemy naszych niezbywalnych praw i wolności. Bo nie oddamy naszych marzeń. Nadchodzi punkt zwrotny.
Dzień dobry Państwu. Będę prowadził panel.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will run the panel on the ethics of business and future of capitalism.
Przed kilkoma dniami
Several days ago,
na stronie Bloomberga,
in Bloomberg website,
agencji, ale
I found, well, Bloomberg, it's an agency that also publishes some journals. I found a text by Adrian Woolbridge, a British publicist who works for Economist magazine. It's entitled Capitalism and Liberalism Aspiring to Development. I would like to quote a fragment of this text because I think it's a good introduction to our discussion.
w duszy kapitalizmu
In the soul of capitalism, there is the unending, everlasting fight between liberal values that provide success for long time, competition, meritocracy, and individualism. And there is also the race to short-term benefits, the control of markets, corruption in government, lowering the level of culture. In the West, this battle was resolved by intellectuals to the benefit of liberalism, but nowadays the wrong side of capitalism is winning because too many intellectuals
filozoficzny liberalizm
have lost their philosophic liberalism to serve
tożsamości.
the identity policy. It's a very sad vision. Hopefully it's untrue.
Nasi paneliści
Our speakers maybe will address this aspect, or maybe they will talk about different issues. I would like to give the floor to Maja Zdanowska, and my question is as follows.
zarządza Pani
You manage
miastem, jednym z
the city, one of the biggest Polish city, the city
bardzo trudną transformacją.
which underwent a very difficult transformation. It has to attract completely new business now. The business of the promised land probably has come to the end, but the city has to live.
W jaki sposób
So how
miasto współpracuje
the city cooperates with business
i unika tego, o czym
to avoid
publicysta brytyjski pisał,
the situation described in this paper, the corruption relations that are very common when it comes to the meeting between the public sphere and the private one. Before I answer your question, I would like to tell you briefly what summarizes our city, which is the city that developed thanks to capitalism, because it's probably the only Polish city of this type that was developed by factory owners, by business. So which is a little bit different. At the time when there was turbo capitalism, because the profit was of top importance, they knew how to look after their local communities. They were building family houses, hospitals, orphanages, schools, and they knew that if we have a long-term perspective on business, it has to be settled well, it has to have the right foundation, and it has to follow some rules of ethics. Before, the ethics meant that you had to observe the obligations of contract, you had to look after the employees. Now the word is different. I must say that I cannot sense that somebody would like to corrupt me. Actually, quite opposite. I think we are following different direction. Information is of key importance nowadays. Bad emotions can be disseminated in a moment, so business have to make sure that its identity is correct, that it is perceived well. So that's why it's important that there have to be more stakeholders involved. So, for example, residents, local government, and residents expect that the government will represent their rights. Of course, other options are also available. Local government, NGOs, and many other organizations are involved in this process. But to make sure that the social development is continuing, we have to involve business. So business renovated, constructed an additional floor in our hospice for children. It was business that helped us to develop social clubs. We also plant trees, other plants, thanks to business. So this synergy and cooperation is of key importance. So in my opinion, I can see, at least in my bubble, I can see very positive aspects of cooperation with business. Of course, some tools have been developed for this purpose. Specific procedures are available to have direct communication, not to become a subject of some suspicions. I can tell you that thanks to business, which started to develop. How can you attract business? First of all, we need to offer good cooperation. We have to be involved. We have to have discussions. We need to support development of obtaining new talents, workers. We need to develop different platforms such as special economic zone. We also have the office which supports investors. So this service is very professional. So we build opportunities, global ones, for everyone. Everybody is welcome to benefit from them. My officials, of course, work according to the rule of law, and they provide these opportunities. They accelerate some processes. They explain procedures. They are responsible for the know-how on the legal aspects if somebody wants to invest here in Łódź. So they need to also facilitate relations with high schools, university schools, vocational schools to make sure that the business needs in terms of personnel are met, both blue workers and white workers. So this is the role for my office, this is the role for all of us, to provide opportunities to develop appropriate conditions for development, to develop good working conditions. That's why we talk to our local businesses, we organize the life in the city to make sure that the quality of life of our residents is appropriate. We also need to create space. Our office is responsible for developing these appropriate conditions and develop benefits. For example, we need to build roads, public transport. We have to implement other projects. Is Łódź the owner of some enterprises? No, absolutely not. We have some municipal companies, city companies that are responsible for some public services. So, for example, they are responsible for delivery water, sewage treatment. There is a company that is responsible for public transport. There's also a company responsible for waste management in the city. All the other things should be addressed by private business. So that they need to take part in tenders to develop and implement the projects such as building roads, renovations, building housing, premises, delivering revitalization projects. So business is engaged in these projects. Thank you very much. It sounded very optimistic. Now, a question to Mr. Giedrojć. Should I refer to you president, or how should I speak to you? I'm not the president. I'm a stakeholder, and that's it. After the crisis in 2008, there was a popular opinion according to which everything was going to be changed. The crisis, just like with the crisis of 1930s, people are thinking of game changers in this election campaign. It's a very popular phrase now, but at the time there was no game changer. Today, in my newspaper, one of the publicists is complaining that a lot was going to change, but not much has changed. So does capitalism evolve? If yes, why? Capitalism keeps evolving all the time. Today, we can say that this is the decline of the so-called neoliberal era. Before, we had a different capitalism. In 1970s, we had the so-called 30 wonderful years. It was the capitalism that was oriented on delivering good jobs, products, and services to consumers. It was less focused on extraction of the value for stakeholders and insiders of business. I am under the impression that it is changing, yes. I will tell you why I think so, and why do I think that it has to change. The view on capitalism, understanding of capitalism we are using nowadays is very weird. It's very specific. It's completely different than during the previous historical periods. When it comes to ethics of capitalism, it's easy to summarize them. So everybody has to do what's in his or her interest. So this wealth will be the side effect of the egoism. It's after Friedman. I don't want to say that this is a new concept, something that was started in the late 1970s, but it was the main paradigm used in the economics, and nothing new has been created to replace it. Economics could be ethically neutral, but it's not the way it is. There are causes and effects. So if someone who has a high position in business would like to maximize profits differently, then this person would spoil the system. So this is really weird when it comes to this view on capitalism, which nowadays is predominant view. So it's very hard to speak about the ethics of business in this context, because here we always have to think of the actors. There's another factor which is worth underlining. This is a kind of focus on optimization of the modern economy. So this system does not allow managers to act for something else than optimization viewed as the effective allocation of resources for the most needed applications. And it ignores the fact that the driving engine of progress is not optimization, it's innovation. Of course, we cannot waste resources, but when we talk about optimization, they actually wasting resources is inherent. So to make sure that the economy is innovative, you need to create quite a lot of waste. And it's somewhere at the margin where innovations start. So it's just like epicycles in Ptolemaic system, astronomic system. So they help to match theory to the empirical experience. However, they are in opposition to the foundation of this approach. So there are the following problems. Actions that are motivated based on ethics, the beliefs of stakeholders, managers, are perceived as in opposition to the common good. There are not enough innovations. Additionally, there is a problem that the innovations available are focused on automation, optimization, on increasing of control, to make sure that we can extract as much value from this economic system as possible.
We don't have to look at the history of economy too much in detail to understand that the breakthrough when it comes to the quality of life of people was thanks to the Industrial Revolution, or from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, thanks to the fact that back then the innovations started on a big scale. So, summarizing, the ideas are limiting the space for functioning. We have to also be aware of the fact that some of those activities might be something that we don't like when Elon Musk turned Starlink off in order to make sure that the Ukrainians would not be able to attack the Russian warships. Many of us might assess that it's not good, but it's a matter of law, what's allowed and what's not. So a system where managers could impact business using their ethical views would be something that the left wing wouldn't like and the right wing wouldn't like. But to us, the rebels, it's not a problem, because we believe in a free society where people are motivated by different reasons, including ethical, in the free game of interests and beliefs, are creating the common good. Thank you.
To ja pozwolę sobie jeszcze
I will
zadać jedno
ask
dodatkowe.
an additional question, Dan.
Pana na
How do you
kapitalizmu
think that the state of capitalism is being influenced by new
w XXI wieku.
21st century
Pierwsze to zjawisko to jest
events,
nasycenie
such as
w krajach bogatych i w krajach średnich.
in the rich countries and in the medium countries like Poland, the fact that there is a saturation of the society with goods such as food and other possessions. So entrepreneurs are coming up with new, more and more weird products and services that they are offering, and at the very first glimpse of an eye, it's doubtful whether they are even useful, but they are being sold thanks to advertisements. We are advertising and convincing people that they really need it. That's how it has always been, but right now it's gaining more and more importance. And the second issue is that for the past 200 years, more or less, the biggest companies were related to industry and energy production. Those were General Motors, this was Ford,
Wielkie
big
tak zwane siostry działające w branży paliwowej.
companies of fuel industry. And right now, we have companies related to
Teleinformatyką,
teleinformatics,
które działają globalnie.
which are global.
Ford czy General Motors
Ford or General Motors was selling to millions of people, but Google is offering product to billions of people.
te dwa zjawiska, to znaczy
Those two issues,
coraz mniej potrzebne,
the fact that we are selling less and less useful things,
to widzimy na przykład w samochodach.
we can see that with the cars. Someone was showing me a great car where, thanks to your voice, you can change the position of the steering wheel. That's funny, but actually I could have done it manually without paying additionally 20,000 for the gadget that enables the voice control over the steering wheel. So this plus domination of Google, Musk, Facebook,
Czy to sprawia, że my
does it make
taki trochę dziwny system,
us enter a weird system that we don't understand fully?
Znaczy, na pewno
For sure,
dobrobyt psuje.
well-being spoils people.
Istotna zmiana kapitalizmu.
Prosperity spoils people. So a change of capitalism will be in a light of a crisis. Whether it will be a climate change related crisis or some other one, I cannot tell. When it comes to the dominating corporations, it seems pretty simple. And it's not related to technologies. Big companies are where monopoly is. So this is the problem of American system mostly, as it was allowed that several companies would be dominating in such a branch, then no surprise the companies are huge. Standard Oil used to be the biggest company because of the fact that it had 90% of market in the USA, and I don't know what else. Well, when it comes to the products, business which is motivated by the will of extracting value is going to head towards whichever direction allows to generate the value. So the change which we are discussing about in circles is a question of what the good capitalism is, what the ethos of business should be, should it liberate from the short-term focus on
wyłącznie maksymalizację zysku.
gaining profit only, and it is not
Nie ma sensownych sposobów zainwestowania.
like there are no sensible ways of investing capital. Let's take a look at the climate crisis,
Takim jak edukacja,
at education and
jak wyglądają usługi medyczne, czy służby
medical services or healthcare. There is plenty of sensible ways of engaging capital, but they are not necessarily at the very moment are going to give you a short-term return that will be satisfactory to the financial markets.
Przejdźmy teraz
Thank you very much.
do tego pierwszego członu naszego
So now,
panelu.
the first part of our panel, which is the ethics of business.
Wszyscy powinni być etyczni.
Everyone should be ethical. That's
Z tego religia, jeżeli ktoś
what the Bible tells to the believers, and that's what
kantowski imperatyw kategoryczny,
Kant also was recommending. So we should be ethical, but usually we are balancing in between being ethical and lacking ethics. Is business ethics something specific? Should a businessman be ethical?
nie kraść, nie kłamać,
Don't steal, don't lie, pay to your employees.
Prawdopodobnie do mnie pytanie.
It's most likely a question that you meant to ask me. Yes, to you, as the biggest philosopher in the group.
Ja raczej dojdę do tego.
I am going to get to this question, but I could start with claiming that everyone should be ethical. But I think that the quote of the English
Na początku
commenter that you've quoted at the beginning gave me food for thought, because it looks like the story about history there is simplified, and that has a meaning for the modern times we live in, because the source of politics liberalism and when capitalism was emerged from wars, from dramatic fights in the beginning of the 20th century in Europe. And
przede wszystkim bardzo duży odłam
a very big part of owners of big companies were not convinced that they want to be in an alliance with liberalism. And the consequences of support proved to be pretty scary. And the model where the social mobilization on the side of the democration of liberalism was stronger than the dictators was the one that won. And this is what shaped the consensus that lasted till the end of 20th century. This ally of great capital with liberalism. But in my opinion, globalization made it collapse. This consensus is no longer.
wielki kapitał.
Well, it's no longer that a huge financial capital is naturally willing to have liberal democracy as a partner.
Dlatego, że działa w
Inter alia, because of the fact that it acts on the global scale, and in a big part of the globe there are other political subjects. So it's not obvious that liberal democracies should be the partner.
Jest też
There is also
ten motyw, który w pytaniu
this theme which lies in the question of yours, whether the people who should be ethical, because here we agree, can be ethical when they are under pressure of reality, of certain situation which are
etyczne nie są.
making them choose in between not ethical options. Even though that entrepreneurs or people who have influence on great finances, it seems that they have huge freedom, but that's what Mr. Giedrojć mentioned. It's not true. They are under huge pressure. They have to generate income in a way that is least ethical, but the most important part is to generate income. If they are experiencing nationalists or autocrats in China or in India,
I w tym sensie
And
wydaje
in
mi
this
się,
sense,
że podstawową kwestią
I
jest,
believe that
w
the
jakich
basic question is what conditions do they work in and how do they define
swoją sytuację
their situation.
ci, którzy rządzą kapitałem.
I mean, the ones that are managing the capital. So, first of all, that means that
Podmiot polityczny
there is a need of a political subject that would be defining the conditions somehow. And right now, in the modern times, on the global scale, we don't have such a political subject. But of course, the global north is a huge subject and could make an effort to try to define those political conditions. And another issue is to redefine the language that we use when defining the income. I was moved by what you said, that the income is such a pressure that, after all, someone who has a smaller company has no chances because, you know, stakeholders, financial markets, etc., etc. But if we focus on how can we redefine the income in such a way to take into account the time scale and the consequences of the activities in time and the global scale, to look at the profit not only in a small scale of a state, but also consequences for the rest of the world. This is what we call, and I mean looking at what we call a profit at it. So this would change the situation of entrepreneurs, and that would influence their decisions. It would give us a chance that they would reflect whether they can act ethically or not. Of course, there are some early birds of this way of thinking. The fact that we can ride, that we can treat permissions for emissions as but you're speaking about CO2 emissions. Yes, CO2 emissions. I think that climate catastrophe is a huge thing to worry about, and this is why I think that this way of thinking exists, but it's right now in minority, and it would have to become mainstream. And here I believe politicians have their role to play, to redefine the language where we speak of profit, of scale, of time, to redefine it in such a way that those who take decisions in business, in entrepreneurship, could act ethically. My role here is just to give the floor, but I would like to come into polemics with your views. The issue of looking at long term is, of course, a huge problem in business. Prime Minister Belka told me that when he spoke to the CEO of Citibank in 2008, and he asked, haven't you seen that something bad is happening to the finances? And the CEO said, as long as the music plays, you have to dance. I think it's not polemics. I think you're confirming what I said. Yes, this is. But now I'm coming to my polemics. If politics are to interfere with that, then they have a horizon which is very much defined. In Poland, it's 4 years. In other countries, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. Some believe that in such a situation, it's worth to prolong their horizon by giving the power to, for instance, Communistic Party of China that has a horizon till the end of the century. But there are consequences to that, very bad consequences. Don't you see that all the attempts to correct the market, because we are speaking, the market doesn't work well, there is an asymmetry information, once again, our market failed. So here we are looking at politicians, but the politicians sometimes are horrible.
Przechwycił słowo czasami.
I would like to pick up on the word sometimes that you just said. I think that politics
Bardzo trudną dziedziną,
is a very difficult domain,
ale to w związku z tym też powoduje, że bardzo
and
często
because of this, there is plenty of
znaczy, gdyby nie ojcowie Europy,
crises of values. But if not Adenauer and other fathers of Europe,
wszystkich polityków, którzy
through all those politicians who are directly implementing the project, if not their long-term way of thinking, if not a political consensus in Europe after the Second World War,
wojny już nie można
that we may not ever allow such a war again,
to nie powstała
then we wouldn't have such an institution that has a political character after all, but creates the possibility of such a European market to exist. And in this sense, we demand from politicians that they wouldn't only be focusing on the next years and on preparing for next elections to win, but to try to think in a long-term way, to try to think, all right, elections are important because it gives us realistic political power, but on the other side, there are certain processes that they are responsible for. Here, I believe that we should demand it from the politicians rather than to look for solutions such as dictatorship. Of course, some say dictatorship is good, but in my opinion, even right now in Poland, we can see what the consequences can be. Also for the market, if you manage it in such a way. How would you, Mr. Professor, relate to the view
Od Smitha, tutaj pan Giedrojć mówił, że to są
same thing was with Smith and Friedman, as Mr. Giedrojć said, let's do our thing, let's look at the profit, let's not mind the other human beings. Of course, let's not kill them, but let's be egoistic, because egoism produces the common good. As it's not working out this way. The world is too complex for such a model to work. It could work when we have small groups that are evened out with pretty similar conditions at the start. Already John Locke was presenting such a motive, that we have similar start, similar conditions, but in the world that is very much complex, where we have incredible differences of power, economic differences, differences of resources. It doesn't simply work like this. It's not that when someone has at their disposal huge power, such as Elon Musk, can be as egoistic as someone who is simply a shepherd on a meadow. So we need to have ways to modify this egoistic model.
Aczkolwiek trudno.
However, it is hard to find ways or instruments for modification, instruments and ways that wouldn't affect economic efficiency and the freedom of people. I am supporting this economic concept, the so-called continental against Anglo-Saxon one. So, according to it, it's the society that develops conditions for the economic community, because maybe not everyone would like to live in this kind of environment, and feudalism survived for many, many years in Poland for a very long time, and there was no social freedom then. So the society must create some equalities, for example, equality of law, to decide how much of freedom do we want. It's the same for the profit. How do we understand the profit? In which scale? What the time horizon should be? So first, the society must decide about these structures. And I think that the climate disaster and globalization which requires that we have the global south, that is a completely different entity than in this part of the world. I have taken part in the Congress in the grounds of the Łódź University. So I spent here the last 3 days, and I can see that there are lots of refugees in Łódź. So the structure of the society has changed. So it needs a very strong redefining of the reach of market, the indicators followed by the market. So it all has to be determined and agreed. Phil, firms, businesses now are very keen on showing that they are ethic. They operate according to the ethics rule. Mr. Sroka for many years has been involved in development of images for businesses.
CSR to jest po prostu element promocji.
Is the corporate responsibility strategy showing, proving that a specific company is really acting according to the ethics?
To jest jakiś element promocji.
It's kind of an element of a publicity promotion, or maybe CSR should be focused on long-term benefits for the companies, not profits, benefits, because they are two different terms. Thank you. I represent a small company from Poznań, so my perspective is different. My perspective to the aspects you have covered. Witold, we've known each other for a long time, so the most spontaneous answer is as follows. If companies do so and they are not forced to do it, and if the money spent on special goals are not based on the money earned illegally, that's okay. So if we develop a standard, if we show that we divide our profits for some other social goals, so maybe for this money we will be able to plant more trees in Łódź, or children in the world, children will get food in poor countries, I think it's okay. Nowadays, the times of CSR, it was used just to show that we are a part of a privileged elite. We've got some money to share, to create a positive image for our company. Now CSR is replaced by a new standard. It's called ESG. So there is a mathematical model which allows to involve companies into fields of environment, social sphere. So we are developing a new standard that will allow companies to join this big group. So companies throughout the world will be asking to show this certificate. I have a pleasure of running a program called Incredible. It's for Sebastian Kulczyk. So we are helping to build competences for young people, and not only. So it's for the entrepreneurs who nowadays do not think of CSR, that they say that CSR is for big companies, for wealthy companies. They say that they have other challenges, they need to survive, they need money to keep operations for the next year. But we are trying to promote, and I'm showing how I develop my company, how I recruit my staff, how I help them to develop their career, how I motivate them, which incentives do they get from me. I also show that the employment contracts I'm endorsing with them are the long-term contracts. So it is great when businesses are determined to do something useful, because there is also a generation of entrepreneurs, transitional entrepreneurs, and I am very disillusioned that people who for the last 30 years were beneficiaries of the transformation, they built huge companies and they think that it's only thanks to their own efforts, that there was no other contribution, and that is why they do not need to share their assets with anyone. So any discussion on the social civic involvement leads to the conclusion that, well, it's not for us. We prefer to act just for ourselves. We just want to act quietly and develop quietly. So successors, very often millionaires, they are having children, and actually we are expecting a new generation of these millionaires who will not have the gene of how to share social responsibility, and of course they will not pass it to their children. And the final reflection from me, I am privileged to cooperate with 357 Radio, so we have interviews with young entrepreneurs. They are 30-year-old millionaires who are very happy to share any ideas on any issues. They talk about artificial intelligence, capitalism, evolution, how to build a better world. And a simple question, when we ask them, how do you perceive your own role in the world? How would you like to contribute? How would you help your neighbors? The first response is, I don't want to talk about politics. But it's not about politics. It's incredible that they do not have such awareness and need, and we can see that they are not open to change. So there are always those who are doing something and they are always criticized. And we should do things. We should watch the good examples, and we should follow these examples. There is a story about Johnny D. Rockefeller, who was the founder of Rockefeller's dynasty. And at the end of the 19th century, probably he was the greatest businessman in the United States, maybe even in the world. And apart from being quite brutish in his activities, he was driving towards monopolism. He wanted to eliminate his competitors, but he was also very religious, and he had a spiritual advisor, Gates. So Gates once told Rockefeller, you have to share your goods because otherwise it will be too much and it will destroy you. And then Rockefeller founded a foundation responsible for education. It dealt with charity, and this foundation was treated in a very managerial manner. It had nothing to do with a foundation founded by Minister Czarnek. So somebody was had to present the offer, the project, and he or she received money for this project if it was decided that the project should be awarded with the funding. So I think we are still missing such models here. Maybe it's because of the fact that several generations have to be rich. Actually, there are lots of foundations. Many of their names are displayed in the posters of Freedom Games. So these are foundations, but of course they are supported by sponsors, by people who are sharing their money. Unfortunately, sometimes there are foundations to give job to children or wife, and of course it's very convenient. People say, well, I cannot become involved in some campaigns because I have my own foundation, so this is where my social involvement goes to. It's not that such people are egoists. I think Mrs. Mayer has a lot of investments and projects implemented, some political calculations, or are deprived of such calculation. But unfortunately, people often lack competence. They do not know how to spend their money in a useful manner, who should receive the money first. People don't know why they should do this. So this is something we need to become educated and become more aware. In this story, I think Gates is a very important character, this spiritual leader. I think he was a Protestant, and in the Protestant ethics there is this responsibility for community. It was really stressed. And I think in Poland we miss some standards. So the people should feel responsible for the community, and it should be especially addressed to people who have some assets to share. So on the one hand we've got philanthropy, on the other ethics should be included in business strategy. It should be also listed as innovation. So philanthropy should be really included. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers. I think that this discussion was very interesting. We have concluded that capitalism is still the environment that undergoes changes. Professor has rightly noticed that the saying that the egoism is the source of affluence, and now people have different points of start, so this saying is not particularly true. But which is developing thanks to capitalism, thanks to the environment which operates, lives. And we also talked about CSR. We said that this responsibility is very important to strengthen community that functions in capitalism, to strengthen the system in the long-term perspective. I think that's all from our panel. We have no more time. Thank you for your attention.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it. And how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihrer Ausreise prelegentów i jedna moderacja.
Jestem z zawodu lekarzem, zajmowała się diagnostyką chorób nowotworowych.
W Białorusi zajmowałam się mikrobiologią i molekularną biologią.
Byłem nauczycielem szkoły podstawowej.
Naszym celem jest budowanie umiejętności, które są ważne na polskim rynku pracy.
Szybko nabierają takiej pewności siebie, bardzo szybko się uczą.
Wszystko możliwe, kiedy starasz się.
Każdy wybór ma swoje konsekwencje.
Dziś na kazaniu o takich jak ty mówili, że to morderczynie.
A wiesz, że ta, która ci pomogła, trafi za kraty?
Trzeba mieć sumienie.
Jak mogłaś to zrobić własnej matce?
Aborcja to najgorsza zbrodnia.
Gdybym ja podjęła taką decyzję, nie byłoby cię tutaj.
Organy państwa nie będą przyglądać się temu obojętnie.
Życie i zdrowie kobiety jest najważniejsze.
Stop kryminalizacji aborcji.
Kobieta decyduje.
Dzień dobry. To znaczy, myśmy się dzisiaj widzieli. Wie pan co? Ja zmieniłem zdanie i chciałbym poprawić. Karty. W urnie. Dobrze? To ja sobie poszukam.
Serio? Pan sobie poszuka? Nadchodzące wybory są zbyt ważne, by zostawić je bez kontroli. Dołącz do obywatelskiej kontroli wyborów. Zróbmy wybory bez piecu.